The Two Greatnesses. An American Life in 4 Scenes. Let me start with a simple, haunting image that stuck with me for years. One that holds the entire story of America's broken, shifting, endlessly complicated idea of greatness. This single image has lingered in the back of my mind through every interview, every cross-country road trip, every late night spent digging through old archives and forgotten historical records, and it continues to frame how I understand the rise, the slow fall, and the fractured rebirth of what it means to be an American in the modern world. I was flipping through bound volumes of vintage newspapers in a quiet, dimly lit academic archive not long ago, surrounded by towering shelves of leather-bound books, microfilm readers, and the still, heavy air of preserved history, and I held in my hands a crinkled 1945 daily print, yellowed with decades of age, brittle at the frayed edges, thick with the dry, dusty scent of a long-finished global victory that once felt permanent and unbreakable. And the strangest, most striking thing jumped out at me instantly, before I even read a single full sentence on the page. Almost every single headline on every page, every subheading, every celebratory caption bore one simple, powerful, unapologetic word: great. It was not splashed across those pages because World War II had been easy, or because victory had arrived without unimaginable bloodshed, devastating loss, and lifelong sacrifice for millions of families across the United States and the entire globe. It was there because in that singular, transformative year of 1945, America finally, fully became exactly what it had spent 2 entire centuries promising itself it would be. For hundreds of years, the nation had chased an identity of exceptionalism, of moral leadership, of unmatched strength and benevolence, and in the aftermath of the deadliest conflict human civilization had ever witnessed, that self-written story finally felt tangible, real, and inarguable. Over the many decades since that pivotal, world-altering year, I've dedicated countless hours of my life to unpacking one vital, unresolved question that sits at the core of modern American identity. What exactly happened to that word great? What quiet, gradual, then explosive shift took place between the hopeful, unified day the United Nations Charter was signed in San Francisco's Grand Opera House and the widespread rise of that simple red baseball cap emblazoned with the polarizing phrase "Make America Great Again"? Let me be perfectly clear from the very start of this story. This is not a narrow political tale centered on a single president, a single election, or a single partisan political movement. This is the intimate, evolving, deeply human life story of a nation called America, a country that has lived through countless distinct eras, worn dozens of conflicting cultural and political identities, and spent 70 long, turbulent years struggling desperately to remember its own true definition of greatness, to reconcile its glorious past with its fractured present, and to imagine a coherent future worth fighting for. Let us travel back slowly, deliberately, to the year 1945, to that precise, historic day when the whole world paused, held its breath, and leaned fully into America's unrivaled newfound power and purpose. It is June 26th in San Francisco, California, a bright, crisp, weighty summer day hanging thick with the quiet triumph of a bruised, battered world finally emerging from war's darkest, most chaotic chapter. The Grand San Francisco Opera House is packed wall to wall with formal delegates from 50 separate nations across every inhabited continent on the globe, each representative carrying the hopes, the grief, and the fragile ambitions of their war-torn homelands. Yet every single ounce of air, energy, and authority in that grand, hallowed space belongs solely and unconditionally to the United States of America. The brutal, merciless war in Europe has been officially over for 7 weeks, the Nazi regime fully dismantled, its tyranny crushed beneath the combined weight of Allied courage and sacrifice. And while the bloody, unforgiving conflict in the Pacific still rages on across countless tropical islands and open ocean waters, while American troops still face relentless enemy resistance and unfathomable danger overseas, every single person seated in that Opera House room knows the final outcome is no longer in any doubt. Total, unconditional victory is inevitable, and America is the singular, unrivaled force that will seal that victory and reshape the future of humanity. On that once-in-a-century historic day, President Harry Truman steps forward to the polished wooden podium to formally sign the United Nations Charter, and I notice something unforgettable, almost ethereal about his tone and demeanor in that pivotal moment. He does not speak with hesitation or uncertainty. He does not beg for international permission or approval. He does not bargain or compromise with the assembled global leaders standing witness before him. He speaks with the quiet, unshakable, almost paternal authority of someone who has just pulled an entire burning world out of raging, consuming flames, who has witnessed the absolute worst of human cruelty and destruction, and who now stands ready to lay down a new, universal set of rules for all of humanity to live by in peace and dignity. We must build a new world, Truman declares firmly, steadily, and sincerely to the silent, attentive room of global delegates. A far better world, one in which the eternal dignity of man is respected. Outside the towering stone walls of the Opera House, massive crowds of ordinary San Francisco citizens, veterans, families, and young people roar with unbridled hope and profound collective relief, their thunderous cheers echoing across the city's tree-lined streets and rolling hills for countless blocks on end. Among the massive throng of everyday people gathered to witness this once-in-a-lifetime moment of global history stands a young American soldier named James Callahan, fresh home from the brutal, unforgiving front lines of the Pacific Theater. His strong young arm bears a thick, jagged, permanent scar from a brutal battlefield injury sustained in combat, and tucked safely inside the breast pocket of his well-worn military uniform are the metal dog tags of his older brother, a fellow soldier who fought and died alongside him overseas and never made the journey back home to American soil. As he stands quietly on the edge of the bustling crowd, absorbing the joy and hope swirling all around him, he is not thinking about international charters, complex global politics, or the structure of a new post-war world order. His mind is fixed entirely on a single, searing, unforgettable memory from 3 months prior, the moment he first sailed back into calm American coastal waters on a crowded, weary troopship and caught his first glimpse of the Statue of Liberty rising tall and proud through the soft ocean mist of New York Harbor. He remembers every single battle-hardened man standing shoulder to shoulder with him on that weathered deck weeping openly, unashamedly, in that quiet, sacred moment. These were not weak, soft, or sentimental men. They were hardened combat veterans who'd faced unspeakable horror, constant danger, and unspeakable loss. Overseas, men who had learned to suppress fear and emotion to survive the brutality of war. They wept openly not out of fragility, but out of pure, overwhelming gratitude and awe. They wept because they'd crossed an entire violent ocean to fight for something infinitely precious, to save a world worth preserving, to defend the freedoms and values that make human life dignified. And now, against all the odds of war and chaos, they were finally home. The iconic torch-bearing Lady of Liberty still stood tall, steady, unbroken, and unwavering in the harbor, patiently waiting for their hard-won return. What I noticed most profoundly and enduringly about America in that transformative year of 1945 is that its global power was never subtle, never hidden, never understated or ambiguous in any way. The United States had built more military tanks, more advanced warplanes, more fortified naval ships than any single nation on Earth had ever thought humanly possible to produce in such a short span of time. Its sprawling domestic factories, scattered across every industrial corner of the nation, churned out more military supplies, more precision weapons, more wartime goods and materials than every single enemy nation combined throughout the entire course of the war. Its brilliant community of scientists, researchers, and innovators unlocked the secrets of the atom, splitting atomic structure and unleashing an entirely new era of unprecedented global power and technological dominance. Its brave, dedicated soldiers marched triumphantly and decisively into the broken streets of Berlin, Manila, and Tokyo, successfully dismantling violent tyranny across 3 major continents and restoring fragile peace to war-ravaged lands all over the globe. At the exact close of World War II, America controlled and generated nearly half of the entire world's total economic output, an astronomical share of global wealth and productivity that no single nation had ever held in modern history. It possessed the atomic bomb, the most devastating, transformative weapon ever created by human hands at that time, a technology that redefined the very nature of global warfare and international power dynamics. Most importantly of all, it was the only major industrialized nation on the entire planet whose sprawling factories, bustling cities, critical infrastructure, and economic backbone had not been brutally bombed into complete rubble and ruin by years of relentless wartime attacks. But let me tell you the truth that has stuck with me most deeply after decades of studying this pivotal era. The detail that strikes me far more powerfully than this unmatched, overwhelming raw military and economic power is what America consciously, intentionally chose to do with that unrivaled authority. Rather than conquer vulnerable broken nations, colonize war-torn territories, or exploit the weakened world around it for selfish gain, America chose the harder, nobler path of building and restoring. It chose to establish the United Nations to foster ongoing global peace, open international dialogue, and prevent the return of catastrophic global war. It created the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank specifically to rebuild shattered global economies, stabilize struggling nations, and lift impoverished communities out of wartime ruin. In the few short years that immediately followed the war's end, it would go on to form the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, better known as NATO, to secure collective global freedom and deter the spread of authoritarianism across the globe. It chose to write the entirely new rulebook for a fairer, more stable global order that would govern international relations for generations to come. It did not annex or occupy the broken European nations it had freed from fascist rule. It did not demand financial tribute, repayment, or territorial concessions from the vulnerable countries it had rescued from tyranny and destruction. Instead, it pursued a far more uniquely American, idealistic, and ambitious vision, to place itself firmly at the center of the modern world story, not as a ruthless conqueror, but as a generous, capable leader and a dedicated global builder. The specific version of national greatness that defined 1945 America was undeniably generous, idealistic, and forward-thinking, yet it carried within it a quiet, unmissable, unacknowledged arrogance that would shape every future conflict and division the nation would face. America operated entirely on a core unproven, unshakable national assumption that its own cultural values, political ideals, and social principles were universal human values applicable to every person and every nation on Earth, that its specific brand of democratic governance was the final, perfect, irreversible endpoint of all human political evolution and societal progress, and that every single nation across the globe genuinely longed to be saved, reshaped, and remade in America's own image. In countless corners of the post-war world, many newly freed, newly independent countries did sincerely embrace this American vision, often out of genuine gratitude for wartime liberation and post-war support. In many other corners of the globe, vulnerable war-torn nations had no other viable choice at all, broken, impoverished, and completely destabilized as they were after decades of brutal global war. America ran entirely on a one-of-a-kind national pride unique to this post-war era, the pure, uncomplicated, unself-conscious pride of the benevolent rescuer. The nation collectively and sincerely believed it had single-handedly saved global democracy from the violent, oppressive grip of fascist tyranny, and it fully expected endless, unwavering gratitude and deference from the entire world in return. And for a short, radiant, glorious period of human history, it received exactly that universal gratitude and global respect. But history has always carried a cruel, ironic, and perfectly timed sense of balance and consequence, a pattern of cause and effect that no nation, no matter how powerful, can ever outrun or outsmart. I've come to realize through years of careful study and reflection that the exact pivotal moment America ascended to become the world's official, undisputed architect of global order, the precise moment it began redesigning and restructuring the entire international system to fit its own vision, was the very same moment it stopped tending carefully and responsibly to its own national home and domestic foundation. Its national foundational values were unshakably strong, its cultural and economic defensive walls were towering and seemingly secure beyond challenge, its future appeared boundless and unbreakable. But this newly crowned global architect became so busy repairing, rebuilding, redesigning, and perfecting other nations' roofs, other society systems, and other countries' futures that it completely ignored its own leaky, neglected, decaying basement at home. That quiet, unassuming, fateful imbalance between global ambition and domestic care would go on to shape every single chapter of America's complicated, contradictory story for the next 80 full years, laying the hidden groundwork for every division, decline, and cultural reckoning that would follow, moving seamlessly and chronologically forward from that pivotal 1945 moment of unrivaled American triumph. We enter the defining decades between 1947 and 1969, an era I always think of as America's full, unchallenged reign as the undisputed architect and benevolent ruler of the entire modern world. I once had the incredible privilege and opportunity to interview a thoughtful elderly German man named Klaus Weber, a man whose tender, vivid childhood memories perfectly capture the pure, uncomplicated global perception of American greatness during this transformative post-war era. In 1948, when Klaus was just 8 years old and still recovering from the trauma of growing up amid wartime destruction and scarcity, the first official shipments of American Marshall Plan aid slowly rolled into his small, completely war-worn hometown on the rural outskirts of Cologne, Germany. He still remembers with crystal clarity standing in long, shivering, patient lines alongside his exhausted, widowed mother, clutching a dented, well-used tin cup in his small hands, waiting patiently for precious rations of powdered milk and fine white flour to feed their starving, struggling family. Every rough wooden crate carrying vital American aid supplies bore the same simple, hand-inscribed inscription that would stick with him for a lifetime, from the American people. At that young, innocent age, Klaus had no real concept of where America was located on a world map, no understanding of what kind of distant nation it was, no comprehension of how many thousands of miles away it lay from his broken German hometown. In his child's hopeful eyes, America was not merely a distant country on a geographical chart, it was a kind, benevolent, almost heavenly force that had chosen voluntarily to send life-saving food, hope, and relief to a broken, suffering, war-ravaged earth. That pure, innocent global perception perfectly encapsulates the second major iteration of American national greatness. From 1947 all the way through the early 1970s, America was no longer merely a victorious wartime superpower. It was the sole, unrivaled architect, builder, and sustainer of the entire world's post-war recovery and renewal. The landmark Marshall Plan single-handedly rebuilt the shattered cities, destroyed industrial facilities, collapsed infrastructure, and collapsed economies of every nation in Western Europe, lifting an entire continent out of ruin and poverty. The groundbreaking Bretton Woods international monetary system firmly established the United States dollar as the official global reserve currency, tying the entire planet's financial stability, trade networks, and economic growth directly to American prosperity and reliability. The formation of NATO permanently positioned Washington, D.C. as the central security guarantor for every free, democratic nation across the entire globe, ensuring decades of relative global peace and stability under American military protection. America's top-ranked universities and research institutions became irresistible global magnets for brilliant, ambitious foreign students, scholars, and innovators from every single continent, drawing the world's best and brightest minds to study American ideas, absorb American ideals, and adopt American systems of governance and progress. Authentic American jazz music, glamorous Hollywood movies, casual denim fashion wear, and core democratic social values flowed freely across every international border, every cultural divide, and every language barrier like clear water bursting uncontrollably from a broken dam, spreading American culture, optimism, and ideology to every remote corner of the entire planet. The competing Soviet Union possessed endless stockpiles of military tanks, highly trained intelligence spies, and overwhelming conventional military might, but America possessed something far more powerful, enduring, and influential: universal cross-cultural appeal, infectious global optimism, iconic consumer culture embodied by Coca-Cola and Elvis Presley, and unmatchable nuclear military power. During this golden post-war era, the United States was no longer merely one of two competing global superpowers. It was a living, breathing, thriving civilization with a clear, confident, unapologetic global manifesto for human progress and freedom. Back home on American domestic soil, this widespread national pride was tangible, visible, and deeply lived in every neighborhood, every working-class family, every small town and suburban community stretched across the entire country. Let me tell you the quiet, ordinary story of Earl Jenkins, a hard-working Detroit factory worker who embodied and lived this pure form of American greatness every single day of his adult life. Earl worked tirelessly on the fast-paced assembly line at the iconic Ford River Rouge manufacturing plant, earning a single blue-collar union salary that was more than enough to purchase a spacious, comfortable family home, a reliable new family car, and fund a full college education for every single one of his children without burdening them with crippling student debt or lifelong financial hardship. He had fought bravely and honorably in the North African theater of World War II, enduring harsh desert conditions, enemy fire, and wartime hardship, returning home to America not just to a stable, well-paying union job, but to a secure, hopeful, upwardly mobile future for himself and his young family. On his wooden living room mantel, he kept two cherished, irreplaceable items displayed side by side as symbols of his life and his country's greatness: a tattered, faded 1943 group photograph of his infantry combat squad, frozen in time amid the uncertainty of wartime service, and his well-worn, proudly held union membership card that represented his economic security and collective working-class power. Whenever his young, curious son asked him earnestly why America was unquestionably the greatest country on planet Earth, Earl never once quoted dry GDP statistics, never bragged about massive naval fleets or advanced military aircraft carriers, never referenced abstract global power or international influence. He always spoke purely from his own authentic, lived, first-hand experience of American life. He told his young son that true national greatness meant a humble, hard-working ordinary man with nothing but his own 2 hands and unyielding personal grit could build a stable, dignified, prosperous life for his entire family through honest labor alone. He told him that greatness meant defeating the violent, oppressive Nazi tyranny that had threatened to consume the entire free world, then choosing gracefully and generously to rebuild and restore the very nation that had once been America's bitter wartime enemy. He told him that greatness meant the entire fractured, searching world looked consistently to Washington for wise leadership and compassionate guidance, and that Washington always showed up willingly to listen, to assist, and to lead with purpose and generosity. What strikes me most deeply and enduringly about this formative 1947 to 1969 golden era is how genuinely generous, steady, and self-assured American national pride truly was. It was the quiet, relentless, unsung pride of a professional firefighter sprinting fearlessly into one burning building after another, day after day, year after year, exhausting, deeply self-sacrificing, physically and emotionally draining, yet completely unwavering in the core belief that the difficult, costly work truly mattered, that the entire broken world was worth saving, protecting, and restoring. During these pivotal post-war decades, the United States deployed military advisors and humanitarian aid to the complicated conflict in Vietnam, achieved the unimaginable, history-altering feat of landing a human being safely on the surface of the moon, and willingly footed the enormous financial bill for the ongoing military security and political stability of nearly all nations in Europe and Asia. This unprecedented global leadership was astronomically expensive, draining massive amounts of American tax revenue, labor resources, and military manpower. It consistently stretched American national resources incredibly thin, drastically overextending the nation's military reach and economic capacity across every single continent on the globe. Yet for every ordinary American citizen living faithfully through this hopeful era, this endless global investment and sacrifice never once felt like an unfair burden or a thankless obligation. It felt like clear, noble national purpose. The unique American exceptionalism born out of 1945's total victory carried with it a clear, active, unifying national mission: to remake the entire free world in America's own hopeful, democratic, opportunity-driven image. And for an entire post-war generation of grateful, optimistic Americans, that bold, ambitious mission worked beautifully and delivered unprecedented global prosperity and domestic stability. It truly felt like unshakable, permanent, unending national greatness. But here is the unspoken, uncomfortable, inevitable truth I've learned from decades of closely studying this celebrated golden age of American global dominance. No firefighter, no matter how brave, dedicated, or resilient, can keep running into every burning building on the entire planet forever without suffering severe burnout, injury, and exhaustion. Sooner or later, every relentless rescuer pauses long enough to look down at their own hands and realize they are covered in unhealed burns, worn thin and damaged from endless years of selfless sacrifice and unstopping labor. By the final years of the 1960s, America's decades-long global firefighting mission, its endless cycle of international intervention and foreign reconstruction, was finally starting to catch up with the nation, setting the slow, steady stage for decades of quiet, painful, unrelenting national decline and cultural reckoning that would reshape the country from the inside out. This natural chronological progression brings us to the third complicated chapter of America's evolving definition of greatness, the long, difficult years spanning 1970 all the way through 2008, an era defined overwhelmingly by industrial rust, economic loss, cultural grief, and long overdue national reckoning. This chapter of the American story is far harder to tell with optimism or celebration because it is not defined by military victory, economic progress, or national triumph of any kind. It is a quiet, grinding, unrelenting story of slow, incremental, unavoidable loss that seeped into the core of ordinary American life over generations. This profound national loss did not unfold dramatically on distant foreign battlefields in faraway overseas countries. It unfolded slowly, silently, and invisibly in ordinary American kitchens, in working-class living rooms, in small industrial heartland towns across the forgotten interior of the nation. It did not take place in the war-torn streets of Saigon or Baghdad. It took root and spread steadily in the deindustrializing streets of Youngstown, Ohio, Gary, Indiana, and Flint, Michigan, once thriving, bustling industrial hubs that had powered America's post-war economic boom, only to slowly fade into empty, hollow, desolate shells of their former prosperous selves. I spent an entire immersive week living and talking with residents in Youngstown, Ohio, in the fall of 2008, immediately after the devastating national financial crisis crashed violently over the entire American economy and sent shockwaves through every working-class community in the nation. Walking the empty streets of that once great industrial city felt exactly like wandering alone through a living, breathing museum of unmistakable American decline. The massive, sprawling steel mills that once glowed fiery orange and red against the dark night sky, powering the nation's unprecedented industrial boom and global economic dominance, now stood as silent, rusted, abandoned hulks, cold, lifeless, and completely obsolete. The once bustling downtown streets that had once teemed with hard-working laborious, bustling shoppers, laughing families, and thriving local businesses were now empty and desolate. Nearly every storefront boarded up and abandoned. The hope and vitality of the community long faded away with the disappearing industrial jobs. Sitting in a small, worn neighborhood diner on quiet Market Street, I met a 68-year-old lifelong local resident named Frank DeLuca, a man whose entire family history perfectly embodied Youngstown's meteoric industrial rise and tragic economic fall. Frank's father and his grandfather had both spent their entire adult working lives laboring faithfully in the local Youngstown steel mills, literally building America's unrivaled industrial strength and economic foundation from the ground up with their own hands. Frank himself had worked steadily in those same steel mills for nearly his entire adult life, until the massive plant permanently shut its doors in 1977, outsourcing all local steel production and every single union job to cheaper foreign labor markets overseas. He still remembers the exact gray, Sam Bidet, the plant foreman, called every single mill worker out to the central yard to deliver the devastating news that their lifelong jobs, their stable livelihoods, their family legacies, and their entire small-town way of life were being permanently moved to foreign countries thousands of miles away. "We won the war," Frank told me slowly and tiredly over a lukewarm cup of diner coffee, stirring the liquid gently as his voice filled with decades of unprocessed frustration, quiet bitterness, and profound generational grief. "We beat the Japanese and the Germans fair and square. We saved the entire free world from destruction. And then we turned right around and gave them our factories, our jobs, our industry, our future. Now look at what's left of us and our hometown. As I listened carefully to Frank's heartfelt, unscripted words and observed the deep sorrow in his eyes, I realized his honest assessment was neither entirely factually right nor entirely wrong. It was the pure, fractured, unvarnished truth of an entire forgotten American generation that had been promised endless greatness and left with empty decline. The groundbreaking global order America had single-handedly built after 1945, the system of open international markets, unrestricted free trade agreements, and collective cross-border security umbrella, had successfully rebuilt every war-torn allied nation and created stable, prosperous economic partners across the entire globe. But those once vulnerable post-war allies rapidly grew into powerful, competitive economic rivals capable of challenging American industrial dominance. Massive American multinational corporations began systematically moving domestic factory jobs overseas to exploit drastically cheaper foreign labor, maximizing corporate profit margins at the direct cost of millions of American blue-collar workers and their stable livelihoods. American consumer culture eagerly embraced these cheaper imported foreign goods, with most ordinary shoppers unaware or unconcerned with the devastating domestic economic cost of their purchasing choices. And loyal, hard-working American blue-collar workers like Frank paid the ultimate personal and generational price for these global economic shifts. The entire American Rust Belt region began to rust, decay, and deindustrialize in earnest. The thriving, secure, upwardly mobile middle class that Earl Jenkins and his heroic post-war generation had built through decades of hard work, sacrifice, and dedication began to shrink rapidly, steadily, and irreversibly year after year. The bright, proud, uncomplicated victorious national pride of the 1945 wartime and post-war generation, the noble pride of the industrial producer, the national builder, the triumphant wartime victor, slowly, steadily curdled and transformed into something far darker, more complicated, and more volatile, deep, simmering, unresolvable generational resentment. To make this painful domestic decline even worse, endless costly foreign wars compounded the growing economic grief and cultural division at home. The controversial, divisive Vietnam War had already cracked and fractured the unified national consensus that had defined post-1945 American greatness for decades, shattering public trust in federal government leadership, foreign policy decisions, and official national narratives. But the subsequent prolonged, costly wars in Afghanistan and Iraq completely broke that fragile post-war consensus beyond repair. The United States spent trillions of hard-earned taxpayer dollars on these distant, endless overseas conflicts, lost thousands of young, promising American soldiers in unending combat, and ultimately failed to establish stable, functional democratic governments in either war-torn nation. For the very first time in modern American history, ordinary working citizens began asking a fundamental question that would have been utterly unthinkable, ungrateful, and borderline treasonous in the triumphant, unified days of 1945. Why must we be the world's permanent, uncompensated policeman? Who truly and fairly benefits from our endless, one-sided global sacrifices? Who still genuinely shows us gratitude for all we freely give to the world? The global international order that had once been America's greatest source of national pride, global respect, and moral purpose now gradually began to feel like an endless, unreciprocated, unfair burden on ordinary American taxpayers and workers. The powerful military alliances that had once stood as undeniable proof of American generosity, global leadership, and benevolent dominance now felt like an ever-growing monthly bill that never stopped arriving, a permanent financial and military cost that no other wealthy, protected allied nation was willing to share or sustain. What I notice most profoundly and humanly about this era's widespread working-class anger is that it was never solely or merely about lost factory jobs, shrinking personal paychecks, or declining local economic opportunity. It was first and foremost a deep, aching historical grief and generational betrayal. These forgotten Rust Belt Americans were the direct children and grandchildren of the celebrated 1945 wartime victory generation. They had been raised from childhood on the sacred, unassailable national story that America was the strongest, freest, most generous, most exceptional nation the entire world had ever known. They had grown up gazing at iconic historical photographs, the American flag raised triumphantly over the bloody slopes of Iwo Jima, joyful sailors kissing grateful nurses in the crowded streets of Times Square on VJ Day, respected American presidents signing historic global treaties to build a safer, fairer world for all humanity. They had believed that uplifting national story wholeheartedly, unconditionally, and faithfully their entire lives. But throughout the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, and early 2000s, they watched helplessly as their beloved hometown streets emptied of life and opportunity, their family-owned factories closed permanently and abandoned. Their own adult children fled their struggling hometowns entirely to seek stable work and brighter futures in distant cities and states. They were not merely losing stable jobs, financial security, and material comfort. They were losing the core national identity and uplifting life story they had been taught to cherish, trust, and embody their entire lives. The powerful, defining word great never fully disappeared from American cultural dialogue during these difficult decades, but it permanently stopped being a present-tense truth describing modern American life. It faded firmly into a nostalgic memory, a relic of a bygone golden age, a thing of the irreversible past. America was great, people began to quietly, sadly, and universally say across the heartland. The desperate, unspoken national question hanging heavy over the entire country was simple, urgent, and unresolved. Could America ever truly be great again? For nearly 40 long, quiet, painful years, that pivotal question lingered unanswered across the American heartland, a persistent national ache and unhealed generational wound. Then, a bold, unapologetic new voice rose up powerfully across the entire country, a voice that told millions of forgotten, struggling, disillusioned Americans that their cherished national story was not over, that their birthright greatness was not permanently gone. It had been deliberately stolen from them by corrupt elites, unfair global systems, and ungrateful foreign nations. This cultural shift leads us directly to our fourth and final defining scene of modern American greatness, the transformative years from 2015 to 2025, the era of the political leader who successfully resold America's old, lost post-war dream of unrivaled national greatness to a nation starving for its return. I saw the iconic Make America Great Again red baseball hat up close for the very first time in the spring of 2016, at a crowded, energized campaign rally held in rural Pennsylvania, deep in the American Rust Belt where generational decline and unprocessed grief ran deepest. The middle-aged American man wearing that now-famous red hat was a retired steelworker named Mike Kowalski, who had voluntarily driven 3 full hours from his small, struggling hometown near Pittsburgh solely to attend the rally and make his voice heard. In his calloused, working hands, he held a hand-painted cardboard sign that perfectly summed up the entire generational heartbreak, simmering anger, and desperate hope of millions of forgotten Rust Belt voters. We won the war, now we want our country back. The dense crowd surrounding him buzzed with raw, electric, volatile energy, a powerful, unpredictable mix of decades of suppressed working-class anger, long-lost national hope, and desperate collective longing for the return of the strong, unified, great America of the 1940s and 1950s. When Donald Trump stepped confidently onto that outdoor rally stage to address his supporters, he did not speak in the polished, sterile, scripted tone of a typical professional politician. He spoke with the raw, unfiltered, authentic voice of a man who had personally studied and internalized the exact same 1945 wartime newspapers and historical narratives I had uncovered in academic archives years before, a man who deeply understood the lost pride, unmet expectations, and unhealed wounds of the wartime generation and their forgotten working-class descendants. We won 2 world wars, Trump declared powerfully to the roaring, cheering crowd, his voice amplifying the collective grief and hope of millions. We made the greatest single contribution to global freedom and human prosperity in modern history. We built the greatest, most powerful, most prosperous economy the entire world has ever seen. And now we are going to win again. The massive crowd erupted in deafening cheers and enthusiastic applause. Mike Kowalski pumped his calloused fist high in the air in triumph, and the endless sea of bright red MAGA hats bobbed uniformly up and down across the entire crowd like visible waves of unhealed old national wounds and long-dormant American pride suddenly awakened after decades of quiet suppression. What fascinates me most intellectually and emotionally about the rise of the MAGA movement is that it never attempted to invent a brand new, untested version of American national pride. It did not create a novel political ideology or original national identity out of thin air. Instead, it simply dug up, revived, and reactivated the buried, faded, long-forgotten pride of the iconic 1945 post-war era, the uncomplicated pride of total military victory, of unmatched global economic and military power, of a singular nation that had single-handedly saved the entire free world and never once needed to be saved or protected itself. But crucially, and most consequentially, this populist movement completely redirected that old post-war greatness. It no longer aimed American confidence and generosity outward toward the global world order America had built and nurtured for decades. It sharply turned that same national pride inward, against the very international system America had spent generations creating, funding, and defending for the benefit of other nations. The core foundational argument of the Make America Great Again movement was straightforward, accessible, and deeply resonant with millions of struggling, disillusioned working-class Americans across every region of the country. America was truly great in the 1940s and 1950s when it was unapologetically strong, unabashedly self-interested in its own domestic prosperity, and completely free of endless, one-sided global obligations and unreciprocated international responsibilities. It had grown weak, vulnerable, and diminished in the decades that followed when it opened its national borders too freely to global competition and immigration, outsourced its core industrial manufacturing factories and stable blue-collar jobs to low-wage foreign nations, and spent billions upon billions of American taxpayer dollars defending wealthy allied countries that consistently refused to pay their fair share for their own national security and global stability. To become truly great once more, America had to fully abandon its self-appointed role as the generous, selfless architect of the global liberal world order and rebuild itself into a secure, self-reliant, protective national fortress, prioritizing the needs, prosperity, and security of its own ordinary citizens above all foreign commitments and global obligations. Trump never once denied the fundamental truth or glory of the 1945 American victory story. Instead, he fully and unapologetically claimed that iconic historical legacy entirely as his own political and cultural foundation. He repeatedly praised the legendary Greatest Generation for their unparalleled wartime sacrifice, courage, and patriotism. He consistently celebrated the unmatched strength, honor, and resilience of the American military throughout every era of history. He publicly called America's World War II victory the greatest single humanitarian and political contribution to global freedom in all of modern recorded history, even going so far as to suggest that the monumental achievement deserved its own official national holiday to honor the forgotten sacrifice of ordinary servicemen and women. But he deliberately drew an entirely different set of political and cultural lessons from that historic 1945 victory than every single American presidential leader who had come before him in the post-war era. Where every prior post-war leader believed that hard-won wartime victory demanded ongoing American global leadership, generous multilateral cooperation, and sustained investment in collective international progress, Trump argued that the true, untapped lesson of 1945 was far simpler and more self-defensive. America won the war because it was unapologetically, uncompromisingly strong, and it should never again apologize for asserting its own national strength, prioritizing its own national interests, or putting its own citizens first in any global negotiation or conflict. I've spent countless hours over the years unpacking and analyzing why this simple, forceful political rhetoric resonated so deeply and powerfully with tens of millions of ordinary American voters across party lines, class divides, and regional differences, and what I notice most clearly is that it never succeeded based on empty political promises or manipulative rhetoric alone. It worked masterfully because it spoke directly, authentically, and unflinchingly to real, tangible, unhealed national wounds that had been ignored and neglected by mainstream politics for generations. The post-1945 global liberal order had brought unprecedented wealth, opportunity, and prosperity to coastal American elites, major metropolitan cities, powerful corporate boardrooms, and foreign trading partners across the globe, but it had completely abandoned, displaced, and left behind millions of hard-working blue-collar Americans in the nation's industrial heartland. The struggling Ohio factory worker, the underemployed West Virginia coal miner, the wounded Iraq War veteran returning home to a jobless, economically lifeless hometown. None of these ordinary, faithful Americans ever felt like direct beneficiaries of the celebrated American century of global dominance and prosperity. They all felt like its invisible, forgotten casualties. Trump's revolutionary political narrative gave them a powerful new sense of validation and purpose. They were not the failures or casualties of progress. They were the true, original, loyal Americans whose sacrifice and labor had built the nation's greatness in the first place. The entire world had spent nearly 70 years riding on their hard work, their tax dollars, and their generational sacrifice. Now, after decades of being taken for granted, it was finally time for the world to get off America's back and let the nation prioritize its own people once again. Crucially, the mega populist movement was never a full rejection of traditional American national pride and exceptionalism. It was a radical, deliberate, and transformative redefinition of what that national pride truly meant in practice for ordinary citizens. In the generous, idealistic era of 1945, American greatness meant building a fair, stable, inclusive global order and standing confidently at its center as a generous, unifying global leader. In 2016 and the turbulent years that followed, American greatness meant defending national interests fiercely and refusing to be endlessly taken for granted by the very global system America had single-handedly built and sustained. One historic version of greatness functioned as a shining, generous lighthouse, illuminating a hopeful path forward for all struggling nations across the globe. The newer, modern version functions as an impenetrable national fortress, prioritizing domestic self-preservation, economic protectionism, and national security above costly global service and international generosity. Yet here is the vital, unifying truth I have uncovered after years of deep research and reflection. Both competing versions of American greatness root themselves firmly in the exact same core national identity and foundational belief system. Both draw from America's deep, inherent cultural conviction that this nation is uniquely exceptional, that it possesses a special, almost divine global destiny, and that it is fundamentally, irreversibly different from every other ordinary country on planet Earth. Now, let us step back into quiet, deliberate final reflection to fully answer the central question that launched this entire long journey. What is the true, fundamental difference between the selfless 1945 version of American greatness and the defensive mega version of national greatness that emerged 70 years later to reshape modern American politics and culture? After years of immersive field research, hundreds of personal interviews, endless hours of archival study, and ongoing quiet personal reflection, I always return to one simple, elegant, defining contrast captured perfectly in two short, powerful sentences. In 1945, America spoke to the entire broken world with open-hearted generosity and optimistic collaboration. We will build this new, better world with you, side by side as equal partners. In 2016, America spoke to that same global community with profound national exhaustion and defensive grievance. We built this entire peaceful, prosperous world for you, and now you owe us endless gratitude, respect, and repayment for our decades of sacrifice. What I find most haunting, tragic, and profoundly human about this massive national shift is that both seemingly contradictory statements hold equal, unassailable truth. Both originate from the exact same national heart, the same wartime history, the same generational sacrifice, and the same core American identity. America truly did save the entire world from the violent spread of fascist tyranny and totalitarian oppression in 1945. America truly did build the entire modern post-war global order from absolute scratch, crafting the international rules, institutions, and economic systems that still govern global life today. And America truly did lose its moral and practical way in the many decades that followed, overextending its military power and financial resources in endless foreign conflicts abroad, hollowing out its own domestic industrial and working-class foundation at home, and growing deeply exhausted and disillusioned by generations of unwinnable wars and unreciprocated global sacrifice. That dragged on with no clear end or benefit for ordinary citizens. The mega political and cultural movement did not emerge from nowhere, out of empty partisan grievance or misplaced nationalist anger. It emerged directly from the painful, unbridgeable gap between the glorious, idealized national story America had spent decades telling itself and the harsh, unfulfilling, disappointing reality millions of ordinary working-class Americans were actually living every single day of their post-industrial lives. The quiet, enduring tragedy at the very core of modern American identity is that both competing versions of national greatness can coexist as simultaneously true, valid, and understandable. The courageous, idealistic 1945 wartime generation chose to define genuine national greatness as the active, creative power to build lasting global peace, to build widespread human prosperity, to build cooperative global partnership, to build a brighter, more dignified future for every nation and every human being on Earth. The modern, disillusioned mega-generation chose to define contemporary national greatness as the defensive, protective power to refuse endless one-sided national sacrifice, to refuse unreciprocated global obligations, to refuse prioritizing foreign nations' prosperity and security over the urgent needs of struggling American citizens at home. One powerful national mindset is creative, forward-facing, open-hearted, and inherently optimistic about global partnership. The other powerful national mindset is reactive, protective, closed off, and inherently skeptical of global cooperation and foreign reliance. One generation asks the bold, hopeful, expansive question: what more good can we create for the world to lift humanity up? The other generation asks the weary, defensive, restrictive question: what more sacrifice can we stop giving away to a world that no longer appreciates or reciprocates our generosity? The idealistic 1945 American mindset built the United Nations specifically to foster global unity, prevent future world wars, and promote universal human dignity across every nation. The modern defensive mindset sought to step back from, defund, and distance America from that very same global institution, viewing it as an unfair constraint on American sovereignty and national interest. The generous 1945 mindset proudly opened America's national doors wide to immigrants, international students, and global dreamers from every corner of the earth, embracing its identity as a welcoming nation of opportunity and refuge. The modern protective mindset sought to build physical and metaphorical walls to secure national borders, protect remaining domestic opportunity, and preserve American prosperity for native citizens first. And in that quiet, seismic, irreversible cultural transition spanning 70 years, the once unified, glorious word great broke irreparably in half for the American nation. For 7 long decades, America has clung tightly to these two broken, conflicting pieces of its own national identity, struggling endlessly to fit them back together into a single coherent whole, trying desperately to remember what it truly means to be a great nation, without losing the core foundational values that define what it means to be fundamentally American at all. I began this entire sprawling story of American identity and fractured greatness with a single faded, dusty 1945 wartime newspaper, and I want to close this long reflection by returning full circle to that same fragile historical artifact, with one final lingering question that still haunts the American national conscience to this day. Scrawled in faint, unassuming pencil in the empty margins of that old wartime newspaper, written by an entirely unknown ordinary citizen who lived through those triumphant, hopeful 1945 days and witnessed America's rise to unrivaled global power, is one simple, profound, timeless question that remains unanswered after 70 years of national change and division. Now that we have won the world, what will we do with it? 70 turbulent, transformative years later, after decades of unprecedented triumph, slow industrial decline, bitter cultural division, and desperate national reinvention, America is still searching patiently, imperfectly, and relentlessly for a complete, honest, unifying answer to that timeless question. It is still struggling daily to reconcile its two conflicting versions of national greatness, still striving tirelessly to remember its own true name and purpose in a rapidly changing world.